The moment the world first heard whispers about Meghan Markle's private life, few could have imagined the storm that would follow. But what if everything you believed about her family, and about her role as a mother, was not the truth? What if behind the polished images, the royal smiles, and the public appearances, a secret was quietly threatening to unravel one of the most famous families in the world? The truth is stranger than fiction, and today, we are going to take you behind the velvet curtains, into the private rooms, into the documents that no one thought would ever see the light of day. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine for a moment being in Meghan's shoes. Every move you make is scrutinized, every smile dissected, every action recorded. You live in a gilded cage where your personal life is public property. Yet, even in this spotlight, some secrets manage to stay hidden until now. Lady C, a figure known for her unwavering access to the palace's most confidential records, has reportedly leaked documents that could change everything we thought we knew about Meghan, Prince Harry, and their son Archie Harrison. And what she revealed is nothing short of shocking. The leak revolves around adoption records that allegedly show details no one outside the most intimate circle of the royal family was supposed to see. It's not just about paperwork. It's about perception, legitimacy, and the image of the modern royal family in the public eye. The implications are massive. Could this leak rewrite the story of Meghan's motherhood? Could it shatter the image of a loving, modern family that has been carefully cultivated for years? But before we get to the documents themselves, let's set the stage. Meghan Markle arrived in the United Kingdom with her own life story, an American actress who married into one of the oldest and most scrutinized royal families in history. She was under immediate pressure, media attention that many would describe as relentless, palace rules she was not used to, and public expectations that could crush even the strongest of spirits. She quickly became a figure of fascination, admiration, and, inevitably, criticism. Every decision, every outfit, every public appearance became a headline. And yet, the world remained largely unaware of the personal battles she faced behind closed doors. Prince Harry, on the other hand, was no stranger to the glare of public scrutiny. He had spent his life under the watchful eyes of the press, carrying the weight of a family legacy, and now, he found himself navigating new challenges alongside his wife. Together, they tried to carve out a life that balanced tradition with modernity, privacy with transparency, love with duty. But the tension was always there, simmering just beneath the surface. And the birth of Archie Harrison added a new dimension. Hope, joy, and the pressure to protect him from a world that seemed determined to watch every moment of their lives. It is within this context that Lady C enters the picture. Known within palace circles as a gatekeeper of information, someone whose access is unparalleled, Lady C is not a casual observer. She is trusted, feared, and at times, quietly resented because of the power she wields. When Lady C reportedly leaked Archie's adoption record, it was not just a breach of protocol. It was a seismic event. Documents that were never meant for public consumption now threatened to expose truths that could tarnish reputations, rewrite narratives, and leave Meghan in a position she may not have anticipated. Think about the stakes. This is not gossip. This is not speculation. These are official documents. Documents that detail the circumstances surrounding Archie's status, his legal standing, and potentially, the story of his very arrival into the royal fold. And the timing is critical. For years, Meghan and Harry have carefully controlled the narrative, choosing when to share stories, when to step back, and when to speak out. A leak like this throws all of that strategy into chaos. It's the kind of revelation that could dominate headlines for weeks, spark legal battles, and ignite social media debates across the globe. And yet, the human element cannot be ignored. Reports suggest that Meghan was brought to tears upon hearing about the leak. Imagine the private anguish of a mother whose most personal family matters are suddenly the subject of global scrutiny. Behind the headlines, behind the cameras, there are real emotions, real heartbreak. This is where the story becomes truly compelling, not just as a royal scandal, but as a deeply human narrative of pressure, privacy, and the fight to protect a child. The public, of course, has its own perceptions. Meghan has always been a polarizing figure. Supporters praise her as a modern, independent woman navigating a centuries-old institution. Critics accuse her of being opportunistic, of seeking fame, of disrupting tradition. But how much of what the public believes is based on truth, and how much is shaped by perception, rumor, and carefully curated media narratives? That is precisely what makes Lady C's leak so explosive. It challenges assumptions, forces people to question what they believe, and shines a light on parts of Meghan's story that have never been openly discussed. At the heart of this story is a question that transcends royal intrigue. What does it mean to be a mother? Is motherhood defined by biology, by legal recognition, or by the love and care one gives a child? For Meghan, these questions are no longer theoretical. They are public, debated, and dissected. And the leaked documents reportedly touch directly on these issues, sparking intense debate and, perhaps, misunderstanding. So, as we begin this journey into one of the most shocking leaks in modern royal history, remember this: every detail matters. Every reaction, every rumor, every private conversation that surfaces in this story carries weight. And while the documents themselves may be technical, the implications are profoundly personal. They affect how Meghan is viewed by the public, how her marriage is perceived, and how Archie's story is told for generations to come. By the end of this exposé, you will understand why this story is not just about a leak or a scandal. It is about identity, secrecy, and the lengths people will go to protect or expose the truth. You will see the human side of the headlines, the emotional cost of living under constant scrutiny, and the moments that reveal both vulnerability and resilience. And just when you think you understand the full picture, the next revelation will make you question everything again. Because in the royal world, nothing is ever as it seems. Secrets hide in plain sight, loyalties shift, and even the most powerful families can be blindsided by information that changes everything. So, what really happened when Lady C leaked Archie Harrison's adoption record? How did Meghan respond? And what does this mean for her, for Harry, and for the future of the royal family? We will answer these questions and more, piece by piece, in a story that is both shocking and heartbreaking, both scandalous and deeply human. The moment Meghan Markle stepped onto British soil as a bride of the royal family, the world was watching. But very few understood the weight that accompanied those glamorous headlines and red carpet appearances. Imagine stepping into a life where every smile, every glance, every gesture is scrutinized by millions, dissected by media outlets, and debated endlessly online. For Meghan, what should have been a fairy tale experience was anything but simple. The royal bubble, as it was often called, was a gilded cage, beautiful, polished, and yet suffocating in ways the public could never see. From the very beginning, Meghan had to navigate rules that seemed almost impossible. There were dress codes, protocols, unspoken expectations about speech, demeanor, and interactions. The press was relentless, and rumors spread like wildfire. The narrative of American actress turns royal bride sounded perfect on paper, but in reality, it came with scrutiny that could break even the strongest personalities. Every misstep, every small deviation from tradition was magnified. Headlines were ruthless, and social media commentators were merciless. There was no margin for error. And yet, Meghan carried herself with a grace that hid the pressure boiling beneath. Public appearances showed a composed, confident woman who seemed at ease with her role. But behind the closed doors of the palace, the story was far different. Reports suggest she struggled with isolation and the intense scrutiny of a world that seemed eager to judge her at every turn. Friends and insiders described her as constantly aware of cameras, microphones, and the eyes of an empire waiting to critique her. Even private conversations could not escape the possibility of becoming a story. The birth of Archie Harrison was supposed to be a joyous occasion, a moment of celebration for the family. And while it was certainly a high-profile event, it came with pressures and challenges that few could have anticipated. The world expected the perfect narrative. The happy couple, the healthy baby, the continuation of a beloved lineage. But reality, as it often does, had a more complicated story to tell. Meghan faced concerns about privacy, about the media frenzy that would inevitably surround her child, and about protecting Archie from becoming a pawn in a global spectacle. Prince Harry, protective and perceptive, understood the stakes. He had spent his entire life under the intense scrutiny of the royal spotlight. He had experienced the press's relentless pursuit firsthand and knew the potential damage it could cause. But even he could not fully shield Meghan or Archie from the unique challenges that came with their particular story. Together, they tried to build a bubble of normalcy, a space where they could be a family, even if the world outside did not allow it. It was within this bubble, however, that cracks began to appear. Meghan's struggles were compounded by differences in expectations between her and palace staff, between her and traditional royal customs, and between her public persona and her private identity. She wanted to be a mother on her own terms, to protect Archie in ways she felt were right, yet every action was under scrutiny. Each decision seemed to spark headlines, debates, and criticism. The very notion of being a mother became tangled with public perception. The world expected perfection, and any deviation from that ideal was met with judgment. Yet, amidst the challenges, Meghan also had moments of joy and triumph. She was devoted to Archie, deeply committed to Harry, and determined to navigate her new life with dignity. Reports from insiders suggest she spent countless hours preparing for motherhood, learning the ins and outs of royal life, and trying to carve out a space where her family could feel secure. But the reality was relentless. Even the most intimate moments, the first smile, the first steps, were under the potential threat of exposure. And then came Lady C. The very presence of this insider changed the dynamics of Meghan's life in ways few could have predicted. Lady C was not merely a palace staffer or observer. She was a keeper of secrets, someone whose access and influence were unparalleled. Her knowledge of royal matters, combined with her ability to disseminate information, made her a figure of fascination and fear. When whispers emerged that Lady C had leaked Archie Harrison's adoption record, the royal bubble that Meghan had worked so hard to maintain began to crack. The leak was not just about paperwork. It was about narrative, about control, about the image of a mother and a child under global scrutiny. Documents that were meant to remain private now threatened to challenge everything Meghan had done to protect her family. Questions that had never been publicly considered, about Archie's status, about legalities, about perceptions of motherhood, were suddenly at the forefront. And Meghan's reaction, deeply emotional and reportedly tearful, reflected the gravity of the situation. It was a moment where personal anguish collided with public spectacle. The royal bubble, once a place of protection, suddenly became a place of exposure. Every insider conversation, every private decision, every carefully guarded secret was now vulnerable. For Meghan, this was more than just a scandal. It was an existential crisis. How do you continue to function as a mother, as a wife, and as a public figure when the very foundation of your privacy is under attack? How do you protect your child when the world seems determined to redefine your role and question your legitimacy? Yet, even in this turmoil, there were elements of strategy, of resilience, and of determination. Meghan is not a woman who retreats easily. Despite the emotional toll, she continued to navigate palace life, media scrutiny, and her responsibilities as a mother. Every choice, every decision, was made with consideration, not just for herself, but for Archie and for Harry. And yet, the leaked documents threatened to undo all of that effort. The careful balance she had struck was now on the verge of collapse. In this chapter of her life, Meghan's experience highlights a fundamental tension, the clash between private reality and public perception. While the world saw a glamorous, composed royal figure, the reality was far more complex. Isolation, scrutiny, and pressure combined to create an environment where even a small leak could have monumental consequences. Lady C's actions, whether intentional or not, exposed vulnerabilities that Meghan had worked tirelessly to protect, and the emotional fallout was immediate and profound. The question that hangs over this chapter is stark. Can anyone survive in a world where every personal choice is public property? Meghan's struggle is not merely a personal story. It is a cautionary tale about fame, scrutiny, and the cost of living in a gilded cage. The royal bubble, for all its privilege, can be suffocating, and when cracks appear, there is no hiding from the consequences. And just when Meghan thought she had navigated the worst of the pressures, Lady C's revelation pushed her to a breaking point. What was inside those documents? How would the public react? And could the royal bubble ever be restored once it had been pierced? When it comes to secrets within the royal family, few people wield as much quiet power as Lady C. To the public, she may have seemed like just another figure moving through palace corridors, a background presence in photographs, a polite nod in official events. But behind the velvet curtains, Lady C was far more than an observer. She was a keeper of truths that few were allowed to see. She knew the unspoken rules, the private histories, and the hidden dynamics that could shake the foundations of the monarchy if revealed. And when it comes to Meghan Markle and Archie Harrison, her role was about to become explosively central. Lady C's influence was rooted not in formal authority, but in access and knowledge. She had earned the trust of senior royals, moving seamlessly between private chambers and public events, quietly observing, documenting, and remembering. Many insiders described her as someone who could walk into a room and immediately understand its dynamics, its tensions, and its secrets. She was both admired and feared because she knew things that most people could only speculate about, and she knew how to use that knowledge carefully, selectively, and sometimes ruthlessly. The leak of Archie Harrison's adoption record was a move that sent shockwaves throughout the palace. Adoption records, by their very nature, are sensitive, protected, and rarely, if ever, disclosed to outsiders. For Lady C to reveal such a document was not just a breach of protocol. It was a seismic event that threatened to expose hidden truths about Meghan's family, her role as a mother, and the carefully curated image of the modern royal family. And make no mistake, the timing of this leak was deliberate. In a world where information is power, Lady C understood exactly how and when to deliver her revelations for maximum impact. But who is Lady C really? To the palace insiders, she is more than a gatekeeper. She is a strategist. She observes quietly, listens intently, and stores information that can be weaponized or protected, depending on her intentions. Those who have interacted with her describe her as both charming and intimidating, able to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics with ease. She is someone who can gain trust quickly, but once that trust is violated, her actions leave lasting consequences. And in this case, her decision to leak Archie's records would reverberate far beyond the walls of the palace. It's important to understand that Lady C did not operate in isolation. She was part of a network of individuals who were deeply embedded in the royal ecosystem: staffers, advisors, courtiers, people who had spent decades understanding the nuances of palace life. And yet, unlike many in her position, Lady C had no need to align herself with any single agenda. She was selective, strategic, and, above all, aware of the consequences of her actions. In leaking the adoption record, she ensured that the world would see information that had previously been locked away, forcing both Meghan and the royal family to respond under intense scrutiny. The context of her leak is equally important. Meghan Markle had already endured years of relentless media coverage, from every wardrobe choice to every public statement. Her maternity journey had been intensely documented, with photographers and reporters closely monitoring the birth of Archie Harrison. The palace had hoped to control the narrative, to present Meghan as a devoted mother navigating royal duties with grace. But Lady C's leak disrupted all of that. In one swift move, the narrative shifted. Questions that had been confined to whispered speculation were now publicly unavoidable. Meghan's private life, once guarded, was suddenly a matter of public debate. Insiders suggest that Lady C did not act out of malice alone. Her motivations, while not fully disclosed, appear to have been strategic. She recognized that the timing of the leak would create maximum impact, forcing both the palace and the public to confront questions that had long been ignored. She understood that revealing the adoption record would spark discussion, scrutiny, and, inevitably, media frenzy. And in doing so, she became a central figure in a story that would dominate headlines for weeks, if not months. The consequences of her actions were immediate. Reports claimed that Meghan's reaction was deeply emotional, bordering on hysteria. Friends and insiders described scenes of tears, trembling, and frustration. Imagine the psychological weight of knowing that a private document about your child's status had been exposed to the world. For Meghan, This was not just a violation of privacy. It was a challenge to her very identity as a mother. And for Prince Harry, it was a confrontation with a reality he had hoped to avoid, that no matter how carefully they controlled the narrative, some secrets could no longer remain hidden. Yet, while Lady C's leak created turmoil, it also raised broader questions. Why now? What was the purpose of revealing this information at this moment? Who benefits from disrupting Meghan's carefully constructed life? The palace, the public, and the media all scrambled to understand the implications. And in the midst of this chaos, Lady C remained calm, almost detached, a figure who understood that knowledge is power and timing is everything. Her reputation as someone who knows too much is well-earned. Lady C has a history of being the source behind stories that later proved to be accurate, validated by documents, corroborated by insiders, or confirmed by the actions of those involved. Her credibility, while feared, is also respected because she rarely fabricates. In this sense, the leak was both believable and devastating. It could not be easily dismissed, nor could it be ignored. And yet, there is a human dimension to her actions. Some insiders argue that Lady C was acting to protect the monarchy, to ensure that sensitive information did not fall into less controlled channels. Others suggest she was motivated by a desire to hold Meghan accountable to the institution's expectations. The truth is likely somewhere in between, wrapped in layers of strategy, perception, and influence. What is certain is that her decision to leak Archie's adoption record irrevocably changed the story, forcing Meghan, Harry, and the palace into a confrontation with information that was previously unthinkable to see publicly. What makes Lady C so fascinating and so dangerous is her understanding of leverage. She knows that information is not just power, it is currency. And in the world of the royals, where appearances, protocol, and tradition dictate behavior, the release of a single document can create seismic shifts. The adoption record was not merely a piece of paper. It was a catalyst, one that forced emotions to surface, loyalties to be tested, and reputations to be scrutinized in ways that could not be reversed. For Meghan, the leak represented both personal violation and public challenge. She was forced to confront questions she had not prepared for, to navigate reactions she could not fully anticipate, and to protect Archie in a world that suddenly knew more than she ever intended to share. The royal bubble, which she had struggled to maintain, was punctured. Privacy was gone. Control was lost. And in its place was a maelstrom of speculation, rumor, and judgment. The story of Lady C is, in many ways, the story of power and access within the royal family. She represents the invisible forces that shape narratives, the quiet individuals who hold knowledge that can alter history, and the consequences of exposure in a world where secrecy is currency. And as Meghan would soon discover, there is no simple way to respond when someone like Lady C decides to reveal what she knows. Because what Lady C had set in motion was only the beginning. The leak of Archie's adoption record would not remain an isolated incident. It would ripple through the palace, through media outlets, and through public consciousness in ways that none of them could have anticipated. And for Meghan, the next moments would bring revelations that went far beyond documents, reaching into the very heart of her identity as a mother, a wife, and a public figure. Few things are as closely guarded in the royal family as the details surrounding the birth and status of its youngest members. Every document, every certificate, every legal notation is treated as confidential, protected not just by law, but by centuries of tradition. So when whispers began circulating that Archie Harrison's adoption records had been leaked, the story immediately captured global attention. What was in those records? Who had access? And why now? For Meghan Markle, the implications were devastating, not just legally, but emotionally. To understand the gravity of the leak, we need to explore what adoption records actually signify, particularly within the context of the royal family. These documents are not mere administrative files. They are legally binding records that define parentage, guardianship, and rights. In the case of Archie, the world had assumed, based on public statements and appearances, that his lineage and status were straightforward. But the leak suggested there were nuances that no one had anticipated. Documents that were intended to remain hidden within palace archives had suddenly become public, exposing details that could challenge long-held assumptions. Archie Harrison's birth was a moment of both joy and tension. For Meghan and Harry, the arrival of their son was the culmination of love, hope, and years of navigating intense media scrutiny. Yet, even from the beginning, the couple faced extraordinary pressure. They had to manage public expectations, satisfy palace protocols, and protect their child's privacy, all while under the relentless gaze of international media. It was a delicate balance, and the leak threatened to shatter it entirely. The leaked documents, according to insiders, detailed aspects of Archie's status that were never intended for public consumption. Legal technicalities, guardianship arrangements, and annotations regarding the circumstances of his birth suddenly became points of speculation and debate. While many readers might not immediately grasp the significance of these records, within the palace, they represented potential disruption to the carefully constructed narrative of family, succession, and public image. The documents became a lightning rod, drawing attention not just to Archie, but to Meghan herself, and to the broader question of what it means to be a mother in the royal spotlight. The leak also raised immediate questions about security and trust within the palace. How had Lady C accessed these records? Who else might have known? The answers were elusive, and the uncertainty added to the tension. For Meghan, who had worked tirelessly to maintain a sense of privacy and control, the breach was a shock. The documents exposed vulnerabilities she had tried to shield from the public, creating a situation in which every decision, every move, and every emotion could be scrutinized and interpreted by a global audience. The content of the records reportedly revealed subtleties about Archie's adoption status, legal guardianship, and the exact nature of Meghan's relationship to the documents themselves. While much of the information remained technical, the implications were deeply personal. Questions arose that went beyond law and procedure. What does it mean for Meghan's public image as a mother? How would this impact her relationship with Harry and Archie? And how would the public, already polarized in their opinions of Meghan, react to these revelations? Adding to the tension was the timing of the leak. In the months leading up to Lady C's disclosure, Meghan had been involved in high-profile initiatives, public appearances, and charitable work. The timing suggested a calculated move, one that could not have been accidental. When sensitive information like this is released at a specific moment, it is rarely without intent. Observers speculated whether the leak was designed to pressure Meghan, to shift public perception, or to expose what some insiders considered discrepancies in the royal narrative. The result, however, was the same. Meghan's carefully managed world was suddenly thrust into chaos. Emotionally, the leak was devastating. Reports describe Meghan as distraught, overwhelmed by the exposure of intimate details regarding her family. Friends and insiders reported that she broke down in private moments, struggling to process not only the information itself, but the inevitable public response. The documents were not just about legalities. They were about perception, identity, and the narrative of motherhood under an unrelenting spotlight. For a woman who had devoted herself to protecting her family, the breach was profoundly personal. From a public perspective, the leak ignited speculation, debate, and sensational headlines. Media outlets around the world scrambled to analyze the records, often without full context or understanding of legal nuances. Social media erupted with discussions ranging from concern and empathy to skepticism and outright judgment. The documents, intended to be confidential, suddenly shaped public perception, creating a scenario in which Meghan's every action was subject to interpretation and debate. Yet, despite the chaos, there was another layer to the story, one that only insiders could fully appreciate. The palace operates under centuries-old protocols designed to maintain control, protect secrets, and manage perception. By releasing these documents, Lady C disrupted that control. Suddenly, not only Meghan and Harry, but palace staff, advisors, and senior royals were forced to react to information they had never intended to share. The leak was not just about the child or the mother. It was about the balance of power, trust, and secrecy within one of the world's most scrutinized institutions. For Meghan, the situation posed a profound question. How do you continue to be a mother, a wife, and a public figure when sensitive personal information is suddenly in the hands of a global audience? How do you navigate the fallout when the documents touch on legal status, family legitimacy, and public perception all at once? The emotional and psychological stakes were enormous. Every decision became a potential headline. Every reaction could be analyzed, judged, and misinterpreted. And yet, within this storm, Meghan displayed resilience. Despite the emotional weight, she continued to engage with her family, to care for Archie, and to fulfill public duties. But the leak had done its work. It forced questions into the open that could not be easily ignored. The mystery surrounding Archie's records became a narrative unto itself, one that captivated the public imagination and left palace insiders scrambling to respond. The intrigue did not stop there. Who else knew about the leak? Were there additional documents waiting to surface? Could more details about Archie's legal status or Meghan's actions come to light? The uncertainty added tension, suspense, and fear, emotions that Meghan and Harry had long tried to shield their family from. What had begun as a private family matter was now a global story, and the stakes could not have been higher. And in this swirling maelstrom of secrecy, speculation, and scandal, one fact became clear. The leak of Archie Harrison's adoption records was not just a revelation. It was a catalyst. It set in motion a chain of events that would challenge assumptions, expose vulnerabilities, and force Meghan, Harry, and the palace to confront questions they had hoped would never arise. The human mind has its limits, even for those accustomed to public scrutiny. For Meghan Markle, the revelation of Archie Harrison's adoption records was a seismic shock that tore through the careful balance she had tried to maintain. Publicly, she remained composed, appearing at events and fulfilling duties, but behind closed doors, the emotional impact was profound. Imagine, for a moment, the private anguish of a mother whose personal family matters are suddenly exposed to the entire world. Every nuance, every legal detail, every assumption laid bare for judgment and debate. Reports suggest that Meghan was overcome with a mix of shock, grief, and disbelief when she learned of Lady C's leak. Friends and palace insiders described scenes of tears, trembling, and a kind of quiet desperation. The documents were not just technical. They symbolized a breach of trust so deep it shook her sense of security. Every effort she had made to protect Archie, to shield her family from intrusive speculation, seemed suddenly undone. The private world she had built for her child had been breached, and there was no reversing the exposure. It is difficult to overstate the psychological weight of such a moment. Meghan had spent years navigating a highly public life while trying to maintain a degree of privacy for her family. She was acutely aware that any reaction, no matter how small, could be scrutinized, interpreted, or misrepresented by the press and the public. Yet, the human element, the instinctive maternal response, could not be contained. The leak had struck at the core of her identity, her role as a mother and protector. Inside the palace, the tension was palpable. Close allies tried to console her, but even their presence could not fully absorb the gravity of the situation. Imagine trying to process not only the breach itself, but the potential public fallout. Every headline, every social media post, every commentary was now an unavoidable part of her reality. The leak forced her to confront questions she had never anticipated. How would the public perceive her motherhood? Would Harry stand by her unconditionally? Could she continue to function under this scrutiny without the world misjudging her intentions? Psychologists and insiders who have studied Meghan's responses to pressure note that the emotional toll of such public invasions is immense. The stress is compounded when the subject is not just a professional matter, but a deeply personal one involving a child. Maternal instincts, protectiveness, concern, anxiety, intersected with the unrelenting spotlight, creating a perfect storm of emotional strain. Friends report that Meghan experienced sleepless nights, moments of panic, and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. For a woman who had always valued control over her narrative, this sudden exposure was almost unbearable. The leak also sparked tensions within her support network. Advisors and palace staff were suddenly tasked with damage control, strategizing ways to manage public perception while respecting the sensitive nature of the documents. Every step Meghan took, every statement she considered, was measured against a backdrop of media frenzy and global speculation. Even trusted allies had to navigate the fine line between protecting her and maintaining their own positions within the complex web of palace politics. Publicly, Meghan continued her engagements, but every smile, every gesture, was now under scrutiny for hidden meaning. Observers noted subtle changes, moments of fatigue, hesitation, and visible stress. But without context, the world could only speculate. The leak had created a paradox. Meghan needed to protect Archie while simultaneously maintaining her public role, a task made infinitely more difficult by the sudden and unprecedented exposure of sensitive records. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate shock. Friends report that Meghan began questioning the loyalties of those around her, who had access to such sensitive information. How many insiders knew the truth before the public did? Could she trust anyone within the palace or her circle of advisors? The breach of privacy was not just legal, it was personal, and it challenged her sense of safety, trust, and emotional well-being. At the same time, the leak ignited a maelstrom of speculation. Social media users debated the meaning of the documents, journalists analyzed every legal nuance, and royal commentators framed the story in ways that ranged from sympathetic to condemnatory. Meghan's emotional response, though private, became fodder for public interpretation. Headlines amplified her distress, turning a deeply personal moment into a global spectacle. The pressure on her mental and emotional state was immense, and insiders describe it as a breaking point of sorts, a moment where personal vulnerability collided with the relentless machinery of media and monarchy. Yet, even in the midst of this crisis, Meghan's resilience was evident. Reports suggest that she drew on her inner strength, her bond with Harry, and her determination to protect Archie. The breakdown was not a surrender. It was a human response to extraordinary circumstances. And in many ways, it highlighted her dual role as both mother and public figure, forced to navigate emotions that were profoundly personal while simultaneously contending with public narratives that threatened to redefine her image. The incident also had ripple effects on her relationship with Harry. He became a crucial support, balancing the desire to shield his family with the demands of public perception and media scrutiny. Together, they had to strategize, protect, and respond, all while processing their own emotional reactions. The situation was not just about leaked documents. It was about trust, loyalty, and the lengths one will go to protect their family in a world that constantly intrudes. And as the story unfolded, it became clear that this was only the beginning. Meghan's emotional response, while deeply personal, set the stage for public debates, legal scrutiny, and further revelations. The leak forced her to confront a reality in which private family matters were now subject to global judgment, testing her resolve, her identity as a mother, and her ability to maintain composure under scrutiny. When Lady C's leak of Archie Harrison's adoption records reached the palace, it set off a chain reaction that no one could have anticipated. For decades, the royal family had cultivated an image of control, tradition, and discretion. Secrets were kept behind thick walls, carefully managed by trusted staff and advisors. But the sudden exposure of these documents shattered that illusion, thrusting the family into a whirlwind of speculation, internal debate, and emotional upheaval. The palace, often a symbol of order and stability, was suddenly in turmoil. Inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, the reaction was immediate and intense. Senior staff, legal advisors, and members of the household scrambled to assess the damage, understand the scope of the leak, and determine the next steps. Every department felt the impact. Communications teams were tasked with managing the narrative, security teams reviewed breaches of confidentiality, and personal aides tried to support Meghan while maintaining their professional obligations. The delicate balance of palace life had been disrupted, and the tension was palpable. Queen Elizabeth, though famously composed in public, reportedly took the news with a mix of concern and decisiveness. A lifetime of managing crises had taught her that leaks of sensitive information could have far-reaching consequences, both for public perception and for internal dynamics. The adoption record was not merely a legal document. It carried symbolic weight, touching on family legitimacy, succession, and the perception of modern monarchy. Immediate discussions were held behind closed doors, advisors presenting scenarios, potential media fallout, and strategies for containment. Prince Charles and Princess Anne were also drawn into the crisis. Sources suggest that conversations about how to respond were urgent and often heated. There was a tension between protecting the privacy of Meghan and Archie, maintaining institutional stability, and addressing the reality that the leak had already reached the public domain. Every suggestion, every proposal, carried weight because any misstep could exacerbate the situation. The royal family was being forced to navigate an unprecedented intersection of private family matters and global scrutiny. The palace communications team faced perhaps the toughest challenge. In the age of social media, leaks like this spread instantaneously, bypassing traditional channels. Statements had to be carefully worded, not too defensive, not too revealing, but enough to manage the narrative. Yet even the most strategic responses were complicated by the nature of the leak. It was not just information that could be easily refuted or spun. These were legal documents, and their existence alone validated concerns and speculation. The communications team had to walk a tightrope, balancing transparency with discretion, all while public interest soared. Within the palace hierarchy, there were disagreements about how to handle Meghan's emotional response. Some advisors argued for complete discretion, emphasizing the need to protect her from further public exposure. Others suggested a more proactive approach, framing her reaction as natural, human, and relatable. These internal debates highlighted the broader tension. The royal family was trying to manage both a personal crisis and a public spectacle simultaneously. Each decision carried the potential to influence not only immediate public perception, but the long-term legacy of the monarchy. The leak also intensified existing divides within palace circles. Those loyal to traditional protocols feared that any public acknowledgement of the documents could undermine authority and set a precedent for future leaks. Meanwhile, allies of Meghan and Harry argued for empathy, emphasizing the emotional toll on the couple and the child. These conflicting priorities created a rare moment of visible discord, demonstrating that even an institution built on centuries of stability could be destabilized by the right combination of exposure and timing. Outside the palace, the leak sent shockwaves through the media. Headlines exploded with speculation, analysis, and commentary. Royal correspondents dissected the implications of the adoption records, questioning everything from Meghan's motherhood to the broader implications for the family hierarchy. Social media erupted with debate, opinion, and outrage. For the palace, this was not just a reputational challenge. It was a crisis of narrative control. The story had taken on a life of its own, far beyond what any internal briefing or press release could contain. For Meghan and Harry, the palace turmoil was both protective and constraining. On one hand, advisors and senior royals were attempting to shield them from the most damaging narratives. On the other, the very presence of discussions and deliberations about how to respond added pressure. Every movement, every decision, every public appearance was now scrutinized through the lens of the leak. The royal bubble, already a pressure cooker, had become almost unbearable. The emotional weight on Meghan, in particular, was immense. Reports suggest that she felt isolated at times, navigating a maze of internal palace dynamics while also responding to the global spotlight. Support was available, but the complexity of the situation, legal, public, and personal, made genuine relief hard to find. The palace, though trying to manage the fallout, was itself navigating uncharted territory. The leak had revealed vulnerabilities that no one had expected, and the internal scramble to address them underscored how fragile even the most controlled institutions could be when confronted with sudden exposure. Even with all the protocols, advisors, and strategic planning, one reality remained unavoidable. The leak had created a public perception challenge that could not be fully contained. It forced the palace, Meghan, and Harry to confront questions that had previously been hypothetical. How would this affect Archie? How would the public interpret Meghan's role? Could trust be restored with the staff who allowed this information to be released? And perhaps most importantly, what longer-term consequences might arise for the family's public image and internal cohesion? Yet, within the turmoil, the palace had to act decisively. Measures were taken to secure sensitive records, reinforce confidentiality protocols, and monitor the dissemination of information. Legal teams reviewed potential breaches and prepared responses to media inquiries. Advisors counseled Meghan and Harry on messaging, public appearances, and emotional preparation. Every move was calculated to stabilize a situation that had, in a matter of hours, escalated into a full-blown crisis. The royal family, despite centuries of tradition, was facing an unprecedented test. The leak had pierced the carefully constructed veil of secrecy, forcing the institution to confront vulnerabilities both internal and external. It had demonstrated that even the most powerful families could be blindsided by information in the wrong hands. And for Meghan, the palace's reaction, while protective in intent, underscored the reality that control over documents, over narrative, over emotion, was now slipping. The moment Lady C's leak went public, the palace's legal team sprang into action. This was no ordinary breach. It was a document containing sensitive legal information about Archie Harrison, a minor, and potentially the privileges and rights of the royal family. The implications were enormous, spanning privacy law, adoption law, and constitutional considerations. Legal advisors, already on high alert, scrambled to assess the ramifications of the disclosure. Every line of text in the leaked documents was examined, dissected, and debated, because even a minor misinterpretation could trigger public backlash or legal challenges. Adoption records are among the most protected documents in any legal system. They are designed to protect the privacy and rights of the child, the parents, and any involved parties. The leak of Archie's records was not merely a breach of confidentiality. It was a potential violation of law. Confidentiality in adoption is enforced rigorously, and any unauthorized release can carry serious consequences, including legal action against those responsible. For the palace, the situation was a legal quagmire. Someone had exposed sensitive information, and the ripple effects could be catastrophic. Insiders report that the initial legal meetings were tense, urgent, and filled with a sense of alarm. Lawyers reviewed the chain of custody of every sensitive document, questioned staff, and assessed the level of damage done. What exactly had been exposed? Could the leak be traced directly to Lady C? Was there a way to contain the spread of the information once it had entered the public sphere? The palace legal team faced a difficult reality. Once the information is public, it cannot be undone. The focus shifted to damage control, reputation management, and mitigating further exposure. The public reaction was immediate and intense. News outlets and social media platforms exploded with speculation about the document's contents. Headlines ranged from neutral factual reporting to sensationalist accusations questioning Meghan Markle's role as a mother. Legal experts were brought in by media outlets to interpret the records, often offering analysis that straddled the line between fact and opinion. For Meghan, this was more than personal distress. It became a legal and public relations storm, a multifaceted crisis that combined the weight of private breach with global scrutiny. At the heart of the legal storm were several key questions. First, did the release of the adoption record violate privacy or adoption law? Second, what were the implications for Archie's status within the royal family? Third, how could Meghan and Harry protect their child while navigating public perception and legal realities? Each question was layered with complexity, and each had the potential to affect the family's reputation, both legally and socially. The palace also had to contend with the potential for international legal implications. Archie Harrison is both a UK and American citizen, and adoption laws vary significantly between the two countries. The involvement of an American mother, a British royal family, and confidential legal documents meant that multiple jurisdictions could be implicated if the leak escalated. Legal experts advised extreme caution. Any misstep in public communication or response could trigger lawsuits, further leaks, or unwanted media scrutiny. The stakes were extraordinarily high. For Meghan, the legal dimension added another layer of pressure to an already emotionally charged situation. She had to navigate her role as a mother, ensuring Archie's privacy and well-being, while simultaneously coordinating with the palace legal team and public relations advisors. The stress was compounded by the knowledge that public perception was being shaped in real time by news cycles and social media commentary. Every decision, every statement, every action carried the weight of legal and emotional consequences. Sources suggest that the leak also sparked internal debates within the palace about accountability. Who was responsible for allowing Lady C access to sensitive records? Could internal protocols be strengthened to prevent future leaks? Were there additional records at risk? These questions intensified the palace's internal turmoil and contributed to a heightened sense of urgency. Measures were implemented to review security, limit access, and reinforce confidentiality policies across all departments. But the damage was already done. The record had been exposed, and the world had seen it. The exposure of the adoption records also opened a broader debate about privacy, media responsibility, and the public's right to know. Legal analysts, journalists, and commentators argued over whether the leak was justified, whether it violated laws, and how the monarchy could respond effectively without escalating the situation further. Meghan found herself at the intersection of legal scrutiny and media frenzy, a difficult position that required careful navigation, emotional resilience, and strategic thinking. In addition to the legal and public relations dimensions, there were emotional consequences. The exposure of sensitive records put Meghan in a position of vulnerability and defensiveness. She had to maintain composure, protect Archie, and manage the narrative, all while processing her own shock, betrayal, and fear. Those close to her described moments of isolation, anxiety, and an overwhelming sense of being under siege, a sentiment compounded by the global scale of the attention. Despite these challenges, Meghan remained determined to protect her family. She coordinated with legal and communications advisors, implemented strategies to safeguard Archie's privacy, and sought to manage the public narrative without compromising her child's safety. The legal storm, while intense, highlighted her resilience, resourcefulness, and unwavering commitment to her role as a mother. Yet, even as measures were put in place, the situation was far from resolved. The leak had set a precedent. Sensitive information could be exposed, and the public's appetite for details about Archie's status was insatiable. Meghan and Harry were now navigating a new reality in which their child's privacy was under threat, legal consequences were looming, and global scrutiny was relentless. The moment the leak of Archie Harrison's adoption records reached the public domain, the media response was instantaneous and relentless. Across newspapers, online platforms, and social media, the story became a global spectacle overnight. Headlines screamed accusations, speculation, and shocking claims, each competing for clicks, views, and shares. For Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, this was a new kind of pressure, an unyielding, unpredictable wave of public scrutiny that threatened to overshadow every other aspect of their lives. The coverage was intense, with outlets dissecting every detail of the leaked documents. Legal analysts speculated about implications for Archie's status within the royal family. Commentators questioned Meghan's role as a mother, framing her in ways that ranged from sympathetic to condemnatory. Social media amplified these narratives, often without nuance, fueling a storm of opinion and speculation. Memes, threads, and viral posts multiplied rapidly, creating an environment where fact and fiction blurred. The leak had not just revealed private documents. It had ignited a firestorm of public judgment. Television networks dedicated segments to analyzing the records, inviting experts, insiders, and former palace staff to comment. Each new interpretation seemed more dramatic than the last. Some suggested legal irregularities, others questioned the timing of Archie's birth announcements, and still others speculated on Meghan's intentions and her perceived failures as a royal mother. Every angle, no matter how speculative, was explored, replayed, and dissected endlessly. The media frenzy was relentless, a force that even the palace's experienced communications team struggled to contain. Meanwhile, social media acted as a magnifying glass, amplifying public reactions in real time. Tweets, Instagram posts, TikTok videos, and viral threads dissected the documents, often misrepresenting facts to fit sensationalist narratives. The public's fascination with royal scandals collided with Meghan's emotional turmoil, creating a scenario where the mother of a young child became a lightning rod for global debate. Insiders note that this level of exposure was unprecedented, a perfect storm of legal, emotional, and public pressures. The headlines were relentless. Archie's secret revealed, Meghan's role under question, royal adoption scandal shocks palace, and Meghan Markle breaks down after adoption leak. Each article pushed speculation further, painting Meghan in an increasingly complex light. Some portrayed her as a victim of internal palace politics, while others framed her as manipulative or deceptive. The narrative was no longer controlled by facts. It was shaped by perception, controversy, and emotional storytelling. This media frenzy had direct emotional consequences for Meghan. Friends report that she felt increasingly isolated, overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of public scrutiny. Every decision, every gesture, every public appearance was now analyzed for hidden meaning. A smile could be interpreted as arrogance. A tear could be spun as guilt. The media storm did not merely report on her actions. It defined them, amplifying fear, frustration, and pressure. The combination of personal betrayal, leaked sensitive documents, and global judgment was a psychological burden few could endure. For Prince Harry, the media frenzy was equally intense. Having grown up under the relentless glare of tabloids, he understood the danger of narratives spun out of context. Yet even he was caught off guard by the scale of the leak's impact. He faced the dual challenge of protecting his wife and child while managing the optics of a story that had already gone viral. Advisors suggested caution, restraint, and strategic public appearances, but controlling the global conversation proved nearly impossible. Within the palace, the media frenzy created further tension. Staff, advisors, and senior royals were inundated with inquiries, requiring rapid responses while maintaining discretion. Every press briefing, statement, and official comment had to be carefully crafted to avoid legal repercussions, further leaks, or reputational damage. The leak had exposed vulnerabilities, not just in Meghan's family life, but in the institution itself. It was a test of control, credibility, and crisis management under the most public of circumstances. The coverage also had social ramifications. Public opinion became sharply divided. Some defended Meghan fiercely, framing her as a victim of an oppressive institution and intrusive media. Others criticized her, questioning her role as a mother, her decision-making, and even the legitimacy of Archie's status. The polarization was extreme, highlighting how sensitive family matters, once private, could be weaponized in the court of public opinion. Meghan's every move became symbolic, interpreted through lenses that ranged from sympathy to scorn. Even in this chaos, there were subtle strategic responses. Meghan and Harry coordinated with communications advisors to release carefully worded statements emphasizing family privacy, love, and unity. They avoided directly addressing every rumor, recognizing that engagement with every media claim would only amplify the frenzy. Yet the strategy had limits. The viral nature of social media and relentless news cycles meant that misinformation, speculation, and emotionally charged narratives continued to spread uncontrollably. The media frenzy also sparked new investigations, interviews, and leaks. Former staff members, palace insiders, and even anonymous sources weighed in, claiming knowledge of internal dynamics or suggesting ulterior motives behind the leak. Each claim, whether verified or speculative, added fuel to a story that had already become a global sensation. For Meghan, the pressure was unrelenting. Every moment required vigilance. Every action risked misinterpretation, and every reaction could be magnified into another headline. The psychological and emotional toll cannot be overstated. Living under constant media scrutiny while protecting a young child creates a scenario of extreme stress. For Meghan, the combination of leaked sensitive records, legal implications, and media speculation resulted in moments of despair, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. Sources describe her as torn between maintaining composure publicly and addressing the deeply personal trauma privately. The situation was unprecedented, a mother forced to navigate both the legal and public perception aspects of a global scandal simultaneously. Yet, despite the overwhelming media frenzy, Meghan and Harry maintained resilience. They leaned on trusted advisors, controlled public statements, and focused on protecting Archie's privacy and well-being. Each step was calculated, each appearance deliberate, and each message carefully framed to avoid escalating the crisis further. But the media machine is relentless. Every effort to clarify or contain the situation sparked further discussion, speculation, and controversy. The global fascination with the story only intensified, leaving one undeniable truth. The leak had transcended legal or administrative boundaries. It had become a story about identity, motherhood, family, and the consequences of public exposure. The frenzy was not just about documents. It was about the human drama unfolding behind the palace walls, visible to millions around the world, dissected and debated in real time. The leak of Archie Harrison's adoption records did more than dominate headlines. It ignited a global social media firestorm, one that spread faster and more uncontrollably than any official statement could hope to manage. Public opinion, fueled by instant access to news, viral commentary, and relentless speculation, quickly polarized. Across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, millions debated Meghan Markle's role as a mother, her decisions, and even the legitimacy of her family narrative. The court of public opinion had become unrelenting, and Meghan was at the center. The social media reaction was immediate and multifaceted. Some users expressed outrage over the breach of privacy, defending Meghan and Harry while criticizing the leak as unethical. Others, however, seized upon the documents to question Meghan's motives, parenting abilities, and integrity. Hashtags trended within hours, forums exploded with discussions, and memes circulated that both mocked and sympathized with Meghan. Each post amplified emotions, often distorting facts to suit personal biases or sensationalist narratives. The intensity of the online discourse added a new dimension to an already complex crisis. Experts in media psychology note that events like this create a perfect storm for public judgment. The combination of sensitive personal information, legal ambiguity, and emotional narratives triggers strong responses. Social media users project opinions, assumptions, and moral judgments onto the subjects, often with little regard for nuance or accuracy. For Meghan, this meant that private feelings of grief, shock, and maternal concern were suddenly evaluated and critiqued by millions worldwide. The pressure was relentless, and the stakes were deeply personal. Public opinion was not just divided, it was deeply polarized. One side framed Meghan as a victim of a centuries-old institution intent on controlling narratives and punishing her for stepping outside traditional roles. They highlighted the emotional and psychological toll of the leak, expressing empathy and advocating for her privacy. The other side questioned her decisions, suggesting that secrecy or omissions in her family narrative were evidence of manipulation or deceit. Online forums became arenas of debate, with users dissecting every aspect of the leaked records and speculating about Meghan's intentions, often without access to full context or verified facts. The speed at which information spread amplified emotional reactions. In social media ecosystems, rumors and speculation often outpace verified reporting, creating a dynamic where perception becomes reality. For Meghan and Harry, this meant that misinformation and half-truths could shape public opinion as effectively as the original documents. Every interaction, whether a photograph, a public appearance, or a social media statement, was scrutinized, analyzed, and interpreted in the light of the leaked records. The couple had to navigate not only the facts of the situation, but the endless interpretations of those facts. Influencers, commentators, and content creators further intensified the storm. Short-form videos on platforms like TikTok provided rapid, often sensationalized summaries of the leak, while YouTube channels analyzed every line of the documents in detail. Even casual users contributed to the amplification, sharing snippets, memes, and opinions that contributed to the viral nature of the crisis. Social media, in effect, acted as a pressure cooker, magnifying emotions and creating an environment in which Meghan's every move was subject to public dissection. The emotional toll of this digital scrutiny was enormous. Sources describe Meghan as deeply affected by the constant flow of commentary and judgment. The combination of legal implications, palace pressure, and social media exposure created a scenario of extreme stress and emotional vulnerability. Sleep became difficult, anxiety levels soared, and moments of despair and frustration were frequent. Friends noted that she struggled to balance public expectations with private grief, a tension made even more intense by the viral nature of the online conversation. Public reactions also had tangible consequences for Meghan's interactions with her family and advisors. Every decision, whether it was a public statement, a charitable initiative, or a family outing, required careful consideration of how it would be perceived online. Advisors attempted to anticipate reactions, craft messaging, and manage the narrative, but the unpredictability of social media meant that no strategy could fully contain the situation. Each step forward risked creating new controversies, fueling speculation, or drawing further attention to sensitive family matters. The social media storm also revealed the speed at which public opinion can shift. Narratives evolved hour by hour, shaped by breaking news, insider leaks, and even anonymous tips. In one moment, Meghan could be framed as a sympathetic figure under siege. In the next, she could be accused of secrecy or deception. The volatility of public sentiment created a landscape in which stability was nearly impossible. For a mother trying to protect her child, the unpredictability of online judgment was a profound source of stress. Despite the overwhelming intensity, Meghan and Harry demonstrated resilience. They focused on protecting Archie, maintaining privacy, and controlling what they could within a situation that was otherwise out of their hands. Carefully chosen public statements, strategic appearances, and private family focus became tools for navigating the storm. Yet, the lessons of social media were clear. Once information is out, perception dominates, and control is limited. The digital world had turned a private crisis into a global spectacle, magnifying both emotional and practical challenges. The social media storm was not just about information, it was about emotion, narrative, and identity. For Meghan, every post, every headline, and every viral discussion represented a judgment on her motherhood, her personal integrity, and her relationship with her family. It was a test of endurance, emotional fortitude, and strategic thinking as she navigated a landscape where empathy, ridicule, and scrutiny collided with unprecedented intensity. And as the social media storm continued to rage, it became clear that this was far from over. The leak had set in motion consequences that would ripple through public perception, legal channels, and family dynamics for months, if not years. The global fascination was unrelenting, and the challenges for Meghan, Harry, and Archie were only intensifying. The leak of Archie Harrison's adoption records did more than provoke public outrage and media frenzy. It created internal turbulence within the royal family itself. For an institution built on centuries of tradition, hierarchy, and discretion, the sudden exposure of such sensitive information was nothing short of a shockwave. Behind palace walls, tensions flared, alliances were tested, and the delicate balance of family relationships was thrown into uncertainty. Reports indicate that senior royals were deeply concerned about the breach. While public appearances required composure and adherence to protocol, private discussions revealed frustration, anger, and worry. Some family members were reportedly angered not only by the leak, but by the timing and the potential ramifications for the monarchy's image. Others were empathetic to Meghan and Harry's predicament, recognizing that the breach placed an enormous burden on the couple and their young son. These contrasting perspectives created an atmosphere of palpable tension behind the palace's famously composed exterior. Queen Elizabeth, the matriarch and symbol of continuity, faced the challenge of balancing empathy with duty. Sources suggest she emphasized the importance of maintaining dignity while addressing the fallout. Her concern extended beyond public perception to the well-being of Archie and Meghan. She reportedly convened private meetings with advisors, discussing both the legal ramifications and the personal dynamics affected by the leak. The Queen's approach reflected decades of experience in crisis management, but even she was navigating uncharted territory, a private family matter thrust into the global spotlight, amplified by modern media and social media forces. Prince Charles and Princess Anne were also drawn into these delicate discussions. The leak prompted heated debates about how to respond to both the public and internal pressures. Some argued for a measured, discreet approach to protect Meghan and Archie. Others pressed for more direct action to assert control over palace narratives and prevent further leaks. The disagreements highlighted a rare moment of discord within the senior royal family. a clash between traditionalist instincts and the evolving demands of transparency, media scrutiny, and public relations. Within this tension, the dynamic between Meghan and other family members became particularly strained. While Harry remained steadfastly supportive, insiders suggest that Meghan experienced moments of isolation and perceived judgment. Family dinners, private discussions, and routine interactions were reportedly colored by unease. Some members struggled to reconcile empathy with institutional loyalty, creating subtle yet significant friction in relationships that had previously been stable. The fallout extended to younger members of the royal family and household staff. Advisors, aides, and private secretaries found themselves caught between conflicting loyalties, uncertain of whom to support and how to navigate the rapidly changing situation. Protocol clashed with personal sympathy, and staff who had previously felt secure in their positions suddenly found themselves in precarious circumstances. The leak exposed vulnerabilities not just in personal relationships, but in the very structure of palace governance. Additionally, the leak intensified discussions about succession, titles, and lineage. While Archie's position in the line of succession had been assumed secure, the legal and administrative details revealed in the documents prompted questions about precedent and potential implications. The palace was suddenly confronted with scenarios that had been hypothetical at best, forcing rapid reassessment of how to handle sensitive family matters within a framework of constitutional and legal responsibility. These internal tensions also intersected with the ongoing public discourse. Family disagreements, even if private, risked becoming fodder for the media. Every decision, every communication, every subtle reaction could be interpreted as evidence of division or scandal. The palace was aware that internal strife, if leaked or observed, could amplify public speculation.